Like us, Jesus' disciples had all kinds of grown-up questions about prayer. And when they asked him, Jesus, teach us to pray, Jesus told his followers to pray, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now, here's the deal. For us, before we can pray that prayer with a clear conscience, there are some things that we need to ask ourselves. For example, where does evil come from? And whom or what do we need to be delivered from? Some 2,000 years ago, Jesus' disciples, they turned to Jesus and they asked about prayer. And when they did, they asked some of the very same questions that you and I ask. Jesus, when it comes to prayer, we don't know what we're doing. Jesus, we're not so sure. Jesus, why do we pray in the first place? Jesus, what's the point? Jesus, would you teach us to pray? Fortunately for us, Jesus gave them some answers. And someone, he was smart enough to record the answers in the book of Matthew. And this week, we're walking through Jesus' answers to those disciples' grown-up requests. Now, in Matthew chapter 6, when the disciples ask him, teach us to pray, Jesus suggests that when we pray, I want you to pray for three things. I want you to pray for provision, pray for pardon, and pray for protection. Provision, pardon, and protection. Yesterday on the Daily Dose, we talked about those first two, provision and pardon. And today we're going to wrestle with that third thing Jesus invites us to pray for, and that is protection. Again, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 13, Jesus says, when you pray, pray this, and lead us not into temptation. Lead us not into temptation. For a minute, let me personalize this. Lead me not into temptation. I know this sounds a little bit personal, but here's my question for today. Do you pray this? Do you ask God for this? I mean, we pray for safe travel, for good grades, a good parking spot at Target, but do you pray this? Do you pray, God, please lead me from temptation? Because if you do, and Jesus suggests that we should do this, and whenever Jesus suggests we do something, I'd say it's a good thing we do what he says. If we do ask God to lead us from temptation, then we're forced to wrestle with the second part of what he says here. He doesn't say simply lead us not into temptation. He also says, and deliver us from evil. Have you ever wondered when you pray this, what is the source of the evil we're asking God to deliver us from? I mean, have you ever wondered where does evil come from and what is evil? I think most of us have this sort of overly religious idea that evil is this sort of thing out there. This force like the Empire or Darth Vader in some Star Wars movie. It's the epitome of every bad guy in every superhero movie that we've ever watched. But think about it. Honestly, what's the source of evil? Things like war and lies and cheating, the degradation of our planet, corporate greed, poverty. What's the source of all of this evil? Well, it's us, isn't it? I mean, think about it. Who devises all of the temptation you've ever gotten yourself into? Well, it's you. It's me. Evil isn't out there. It's something we create by the choices we make. In a sense, we aren't victims to it. We actually create it by our jealousy, our fear, our greed, which leads us into temptation. When we live our lives for personal gratification, we're led into circles that have us creating, well, evil. Jesus suggests there's a path that leads us from temptation. It's not more discipline. It's not self-control. The path that leads us away from temptation is this. Jesus invites us to follow me. It's hearing Jesus' words and actually following them. Jesus says, I will not lead you in temptation, but because I love you. So Jesus says, when you pray, pray this. God, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil that we create. God, keep us from being the source of temptation, not only for ourselves, but for the people we love the most.